It's late. The house is quiet. You're scrolling through listings you probably shouldn't be looking at, and you land on a home that looks fine, not amazing, not special, but the price catches your eye. $500,000. For a place with a cramped kitchen, aging carpet, and a backyard that barely fits a grill. You pause and do the mental math. You check the price again, just to be sure. Same number. That subtle feeling creeps in. The sense that something isn't wrong with you, but with the entire equation. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people eventually arrive at on their own. The housing math no longer works the way it used to. Not emotionally, not practically, and definitely not sustainably for the majority of buyers in 2026. This isn't about pessimism or negativity. It's about understanding what affordability actually means once you strip away marketing language, optimistic assumptions, and approval letters designed to close deals. Let's ground ourselves in reality. In many developed markets today, a $500,000 price tag no longer signals luxury. It signals average. A basic 3-bedroom home within commuting distance of a major city now routinely carries that number, whether you're looking in parts of the US, Canada, or the UK. This shift didn't happen overnight, but it's reached a point where the disconnect between incomes and prices can't be ignored anymore. What makes this especially confusing is that incomes did rise over time, just not in a way that kept pace. Housing prices appear to have moved on a different trajectory altogether. When homes cost a couple of times annual household income, ownership felt achievable with planning and patience. When that ratio stretches to multiples that would have sounded absurd a few decades ago, the entire meaning of affordable quietly changes. Yet the system rarely updates its language. Mortgage approvals still arrive. Lending thresholds still exist. People around you still manage to buy. So you're left wondering if the problem is your discipline, your timing, or your expectations. That's where clarity matters most, because approval and affordability are not the same thing. Affordability isn't about the maximum loan someone is willing to offer you. It's about what a household can carry month after month without sacrificing stability, flexibility, or peace of mind. That distinction has become increasingly blurred. Lenders assess risk over the short to medium term. They're structured to evaluate whether payments can be made, not whether those payments leave room for life to happen around them. Start with the first barrier almost everyone underestimates: cash. Down payments are often discussed casually, as if they're a temporary inconvenience rather than a structural obstacle. Even reduced down payment options still require meaningful sums saved up front. For many households, that savings gap isn't a matter of budgeting harder for a year or two. It's a gap that competes directly with rising rent, daily expenses, and stagnant wage growth. Saving while prices continue to rise creates a treadmill effect. You're moving, but the target keeps drifting forward. And when buyers opt for smaller down payments to get in sooner, they don't avoid cost. They simply defer it into the future in the form of higher monthly obligations and added insurance expenses designed to protect lenders, not homeowners. Once the purchase is complete, the true monthly cost of ownership begins to reveal itself. Mortgage payments are only the foundation. Taxes, insurance, maintenance, and risk-related costs stack quietly on top. Many of these expenses rise independently of income and don't care whether your budget feels tight that month. They arrive anyway. Maintenance deserves special attention because it's both inevitable and unpredictable. Homes age, systems fail. Weather does what it does. Even routine upkeep becomes expensive when labor and materials rise faster than wages. Skipping maintenance doesn't eliminate cost. It delays it, often amplifying the impact later. When all these pieces are added together, the monthly figure that actually matters often surprises people. It's rarely the number shown in listing calculators or quick online estimates. And once that real number exists, it has to be measured against income in a realistic way, not an optimistic one. Financial guidelines exist for a reason. They aren't arbitrary. They're designed to preserve margin, space in a budget for volatility, emergencies, and long-term planning. When housing consumes too much of a household's income, everything else becomes fragile. One disruption can cascade into many. What's striking is how quickly even relatively high incomes can feel constrained once housing costs dominate the equation. On paper, a six-figure household income still sounds like financial security. In practice, once taxes, insurance, transportation, healthcare, and basic living costs are accounted for, that margin can evaporate faster than expected. This is how house poor happens, not through reckless spending or poor decision-making, but through gradual normalization of risk. Each individual compromise seems manageable. Together, they form a system that leaves no buffer. And yet, very few participants in the housing process are incentivized to slow this down. Sellers price according to recent sales. Agents are rewarded for closing, not caution. Lenders operate within regulatory thresholds that allow for significant stretching. None of this requires bad intent. It's simply how the system functions. Once a buyer commits, flexibility disappears. Housing is illiquid. Exiting is costly. Adjusting downward isn't simple. That lack of reversibility magnifies the stakes of the initial decision far beyond what many buyers realize. The psychological toll of this setup often goes unspoken. Constant financial vigilance becomes normal. Decisions shrink. Risk tolerance vanishes. Every unexpected expense carries emotional weight because there's no room to absorb it. Over time, that stress reshapes behavior, priorities, and even career choices. This is why framing matters. When affordability discussions focus only on access, who can get approved, they miss the larger picture. Sustainability matters more than access. Stability matters more than ownership status. Flexibility matters more than appearances. It's also why comparisons across generations can be misleading. Past buyers operated under different ratios, different cost structures, and different safety nets. Applying yesterday's expectations to today's conditions doesn't produce wisdom. It produces pressure. There's another layer here that deserves acknowledgement. Housing has increasingly been treated as both shelter and investment, and those goals don't always align for the individual buyer. Price appreciation benefits owners on paper, but it doesn't reduce monthly obligations. It doesn't help during a job loss. It doesn't pay for repairs. Equity can feel reassuring, but it isn't liquid security. True financial resilience comes from margin, from having options, from being able to adapt when circumstances change. An asset that consumes most of a household's resources limits those options, even if its long-term value appears positive. None of this means homeownership is inherently bad or always the wrong choice. It means context matters. Income stability matters. Timing matters. Personal risk tolerance matters. So does the ability to walk away from a deal that doesn't align with reality, even when social pressure says otherwise. Choosing not to buy under unfavorable conditions isn't failure. It's analysis. It's recognizing that participation isn't mandatory, even when the narrative suggests otherwise. Renting, waiting, relocating, or downsizing expectations can all be rational responses to a market that no longer reflects historical norms. The hardest part is emotional, not mathematical. Letting go of an idea you were told represents success can feel like giving up. In reality, it can be a form of self-preservation. Financial decisions don't exist in isolation. They shape stress levels, relationships, health, and long-term opportunity. A market disconnected from income reality eventually forces adjustment somewhere. That adjustment doesn't always arrive in the form people expect. Until it does, individuals are left to navigate the gap themselves, one decision at a time. The most grounded approach isn't to ask how much house you can qualify for. It's to ask how much life you want to protect around that house, how much uncertainty you can tolerate, how much flexibility you're willing to give up. Affordability isn't a single number, it's a balance. And for many people, that balance currently exists well below what the market labels as normal. Accepting that isn't defeat. It's clarity. At a time when pressure is high and narratives are loud, The quiet discipline of running honest numbers may be the most valuable skill a buyer can have. Not to prove something, not to keep up, but to build a life that isn't permanently one expense away from stress. Sometimes the most rational move in an irrational environment is simply choosing not to play along, and recognizing that choice for what it is, not fear, not failure, but financial self-respect grounded in mathematics, not mythology.